Consequence Podcast Network.
Welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With. It's an audio interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Wherever you're listening from today, please do hit the subscribe button. And if it's a place where you can do a rating or review, that would be awesome as well. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today, my guest is the band Beach House. They've got a brand new record out. It's called 7. It is absolutely beautiful. We talk about the ins and outs of the record, also about how parts of it are a little bit Warhol inspired. We also discuss the visual association people have with music and the way this duo is listening to music these days, and the numerology that plays a big part in the record. It's Kyle Meredith with Beach House.
The compliments first. 7 is one of the coolest, nicest, prettiest, most awesome records of the year so far. Congratulations on this one.
That's so nice to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
No problem. I know it's sometimes, for an album, good to start on the ones before it, and it's only notable, it's really notable in this case because, 15 saw you all release 2 records, almost simultaneously, within a couple months of each other. I do get the feeling that it was sort of like the end of a chapter. Like did it feel like you were that cleaned out the closet or something and set you up for something new?
I think doing something like that was just such magnitude. I think there's no repeating that. I think we learned a great deal from that experience of putting out 2 records in 1 year. And the whole recording process was great, but, something that I think really pushed us to, a certain direction. And I think we went as far as we wanted. And I think the seeds of knowing we wanted things to be different some point in the future were definitely planted in that time, I feel.
Is there any sense of unease when something like that happens? Like, because the scariest thing to a writer or a comedian or something is the blank page, when everything's already been pushed to the side. Did you have that feeling?
I think it was more the opposite. Like it was exhilarating. Sometimes just knowing how you feel is such an exhilarating feeling. Like ambiguity is not a good feeling creatively. And I think that when we finished up those 2 records, there was something so obvious and clear. And it took a long time to get to that point. I guess 6 records. It was just so obviously clear that a change needed to come for us creatively. And just really naturally, it wasn't an intellectual thing. It was just the end of that road. So it was more just kind of exciting when we went to start working on a new record. We didn't know it would happen so quickly, but we just kind of knew, all right, well, we're going to start a new chapter here.
Yeah.
When you're ready for change, and then you're wide open, and then you start to be able to see the sort of signs, and then your mind clears a little bit, and you go, oh, okay, should we consider reaching out and asking Sonic Boom? If you'd be, that kind of thing starts to happen when you're ready. But you need to be ready for the change. And I think that takes time, and you truly don't know when that's going to happen. All you have is the desire to change, and that's the most important, I think.
When I hear you all talk about, I think the term used at least once in another interview was finding sounds. And I had this imagery in my head, like catching fireflies or something. Like it seemed very different from what a lot of folks, the way they approach, trying something new. Is there any process to that, or is it just kind of messing around until you hear something that sounds good and we can work with that and do something with that?
I think the catching sounds thing probably comes from maybe some things you said recently about how in the writing and recording process of this album, 7, we were catching songs and pieces of songs and takes pretty swiftly because we had a lot more freedom and control over our recording process. Alex and James helped us, our drummer, build a little home recording world in our practice space, not in our actual home. It's in a studio that we have had since 2009. And so the recording process started very, very naturally and very quickly. So we were catching songs, we were catching takes, we were catching vocals.
Yeah, but in terms of finding things that creatively drive you, I think that for us has always just been really natural. It's just kind of part of our flow, finding keyboards, pedals, whatever, and then just kind of identifying very naturally by our own aesthetics, the things that seem enchanting about those tools.
Well, I'll bring up another line that I really loved reading and sort of trying to work on myself is beauty in dealing with darkness, and there's empathy and love that grows from collective trauma. But that for me, that seemed like you're talking about the bigger themes. Like a lot of artists are trying to figure out how to work in what they're seeing around them, what's happening in the news, in the environment, and everything else, and put it into poetry. And when I read a line like that, I think, well, that might be what you're talking about. And if so, it seems like you have a lot of optimism for what is growing from the madness.
Yeah, I think that's a given, though. I think most people who make music or paintings or any creative endeavor, I would like to believe that at the core of that is a form of love and it's expression. We're human beings just like everybody else, living in the world just like everybody else. And the music we make and have, and not just this record, but every one, I think we would say for every single one is an expression of the existence of living at that particular time, past, present, and future. I think that these are just sort of more very obvious common threads throughout all art. So I think that's from the bio, actually, the thing that you're referencing, that we wrote ourselves. And we were just trying to, create a context so that people would understand the framework for which we're coming from. That's it. It's not deeper than that, I guess.
I'll bring up a song that might fit in with that, though. Girl of the Year. I've seen a lot of fans kind of latch on to, some great wordplay in that song with get dressed to undress, dress to impress.
Depressed to impress.
So either way, I mean, it seems like, that what I'm listening to here is again, part of the conversation of what's happening around the world. Women in the industry, obviously, bringing up Me Too. And with a song like Girl of the Year, it sort of directly puts the spotlight on that. Is that the realm that is that the park you're swinging in right there?
There are no direct political references on the record. Like, we've mentioned Me Too just as an example of one of the many occurrences in the world of change that are happening in a world of darkness. But we're pretty adamant about the fact that this is not a political record in that way. And for me, Girl of the Year is more about a Warholian, Andy Warhol, glamour, superstar. It's about the fleeting. It's about the darkness underneath the mirror, that kind of world. It's about a fleeting thing. It's in that realm. Less of the political connection overtly. To be honest, just to be clear.
No, right. You mentioned the pop art. I mean, that makes it that made its way to the cover as well, right?
Of course, and also all the visualizers we have. The op art is a huge theme throughout this record in terms of what you're seeing alongside the music and the cover. Yeah, the rips, the collage, the fragmented women's face, the era, the sort of late 60s through 70s world. And just, it's not just about this current time that we're living in. That's not what the record is about. It's something that's been throughout. Darkness has always existed, and politics have always been muddy. So I think that it's more always coming from a cinematic realm. The artwork is very influenced by, that era, the factory, movies, the use of women in general through film and photography and what they represent. And I think for something like Girl of the Year, that's particularly, I think, a reference to the glamour and the dark side of that.
Well, I'll bring up another song, too, while I'm here. A favorite of mine ends up being Black Car, which, speaking of darker, it's got a darker tone to it. I have seen some comparisons. People like, this is you all sort of getting your Depeche Mode on in a little way. Is there any story behind sort of where that song comes from musically?
Well, I mean, it's kind of obvious that the whole thing was built around that arpeggio that starts the song. And that was just a keyboard we found in 2012. And that particular arpeggiator does a really interesting thing where it changes the sequence based on how many notes you're holding down. So when you held down 4 notes, it did that jumping thing where it's going low, high, kind of it's like ratcheting its way upward, which is kind of unique and odd. So it just kind of, stemmed from there. And then it just grew into a feeling that we identified with. And that feeling became Black Car because when I first heard, the music, that was the immediate vision was of night. That song for me evokes night, among many other things. But music has that power, certain chords, certain notes, certain patterns, certain rhythms, fluctuations will incite color and vision. I think that's the beauty of music is that it inspires. It can be very inspiring.
I have a lot of favorite albums that I associate with a certain color.
I think most people would say that their favorite music, their favorite songs, everybody would realize that they attach each thing to a memory, to something that they felt very strongly, a smell, place. I think that's very common, that things that you're attracted to, you're drawn to, and that you cherish generally are attached to visions. I think people might not realize it, but if they had to think about it, they would definitely realize how much visualization occurs when you're listening to music.
Yeah, and I'll tie that in. I mean, I'm in my mid-30s. I grew up in the 90s in the era where, soundtracks and compilations were, our lifeblood pre-internet and things like that. And, I mean, even now, soundtracks, for the same reasons that you're talking about, they hold so much importance to me because they're connected to these coming-of-age visuals, I guess. And
we're the same age, probably maybe just a tad older than you if you're in your mid. But, yeah, we're of the same, pre-internet, pre-cell phone. There's a lot more time to just kind of sit and stare at your stereo and see what you saw in the air. It's like a very, much more of a private time.
Do y'all find yourself having to wrestle with, I don't want to call that nostalgia because I think it's something more pure than that. It's not just about getting back to a time, but the way you treat music and the way you want to absorb music in that sort of way versus the way a lot of it's pushed at us these days. Do you find yourself struggling with that at all, or have you been able to kind of, keep it pure?
I don't think it's necessarily struggling, but I have realized recently, like there are certain ways that as you age, you adapt to the new world, and every person adapts to it in their own way. Like some people really ride with it. They'll be 50 and they're, locked into technology, and, like their slang is a certain way and their aesthetic, and everything is shifting and then certain people kind of hold on to some point in their life. Everyone like ages in their own funny way. And I realized recently that like I'm never going to listen to music the way people listen to music now. Like I'm never going to lose my kind of album-y thing, and the kind of like slow, repeated listening to the same music, and I can't really adapt. But, that's just, what
it's also the way you view music. Like it's not just a commodity for you. It's an experience, and even if it's not even just an album, it's just a particular song. Like you're going to take that time and space out for that music. It's like a form of respect, I suppose.
There was a time when people were more alone, when you had more time to stare at the stereo speakers, when you had more time to obsess over, and that's a lot of time the myth making would start. And I sort of thought, with the numerology thing that's happening with this record, with the sevens and the way everything adds up, I thought, man, the fact that it's happening in the way that it's happening now, if you could imagine 20, 30 years ago how people would have treated that, it would have been more like, Paul is dead type of stuff, I think.
Maybe, yeah, it's true. I mean...
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows?
Who
knows?
I mean, that's got to be a little fun to play with. Like, how in control of that and how much of this has been coincidence?
That's a great question. And I think the reason why 7 seems so appropriate for this record is because of the level and the number of occurrences that seem so oddly perfectly timed. Like the whole creating of the record and the time and the year, 2017, and working with Sonic Boom and working with James Barone, our drummer. It's like everything felt so new and right. And that can really be something quite freaky because you cannot plan that. You can work hard and create structures, but you cannot guarantee that, it's going to happen the way that you would wish it would happen. And so a lot of stuff kept happening. And there are a lot of little symbols and odd coincidences. And I mean, some super fans have even, found all these other kind of like numerological 7 connections. But those are also things that we did not plan. They're just total coincidences. So yeah, there's a lot of that feeling of this probably was very meant to be somehow. So no words could have, embodied that as a title for this record. Nothing does.
The universe pushing it together. It's also probably, if I had to pick, my all-time favorite Prince song. So it's good company to keep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love listening to this record. I've already heard it so many times since it came out. Thank you all for making it again, and thank you for taking the time to give me the call today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the interview. It's fun.
Yeah, it was nice talking to you.
You all too. Take care, and we'll see you out on the road.
All right, thanks.
All right, bye.
Hey, thanks so much to Beach House for giving me that call. The new record is called 7. It is out now on Sub Pop Records. You can subscribe to Consequence of Sound's YouTube channel. That's right. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button to keep up with your favorite artists and interviews. And if you're listening to the podcast, please do give that a rating or review over at iTunes or Podchaser, wherever you're listening from today. Then you can head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern. We've also got some bonus episodes over there. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.